Welcome and thank you for joining us today as we start our winter term Visiting Artist Lecture Series with Fred Liang, presented by the University of Oregon Department of Art and the Center for Art Research. I'm Charlene Leo, Acting Director of the School of Art and Design and Associate Dean for the College of Design. I want to begin with the acknowledgement that the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians, and they continue to make important contributions to their communities, to the university, to the state of Oregon, and to the world. With today's event, we express our respect to these people and the many more who have ancestral connections to this land and other displaced Indigenous people who call Oregon home. Our lecture tonight is made possible by the Gordon W. Gilkey Endowed Fund. The fund supports the teaching and practice of studio-based printmaking and the study of the history of prints in the Department of Art and the Department of Art History and Architecture. I'm especially looking forward to this lecture today as my own creative work is in the field of printmaking. We have a wonderful series of speakers, so please make sure to take a look at the Department of Art website or the School of Art and Design events page to register for future lectures. Please note that the lecture for Mario Ibarra next week has been rescheduled in May. Now I'll turn it over to Eric Guerrero, the visiting professor in printmaking, who will be introducing Fred.
Thanks, Charlene. Fred H.C. Liang received a BFA from the University of Manitoba and an MFA from Yale University. His honors include Massachusetts Cultural Council arts grants in both painting, printmaking, and works on paper. Liang's work is in numerous public and private collections, including Fidelity, the Gunn Collection, Addison Museum of American Art, and the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University. He recently exhibited work at the Currier Museum of Art in New Hampshire, Inside Out Museum in Beijing, and the ICA, Boston. Liang's most recent exhibitions include the Milwaukee Art Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin and Addison Museum of American Art in Massachusetts, H.C. Hua Gallery in Berlin, and Jerez de la Frontera Gallery in University of Cadiz. He just completed a residency at the Museo de Arte Contemporary in Santiago de Chile, in Chile, and the Swatch Art Peace Hotel in Shanghai, China. His work was recently interviewed by the Huffington Post, WBUR Open Studio, and reviewed in the Boston Globe. Liang is a professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston, Massachusetts, USA, where he is the coordinator of the printmaking department. Liang is also a 2020 Joan Mitchell Foundation grant recipient. So if you would join me in welcoming Fred. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks for the introduction. I want to thank Charlene and Eric for inviting me. And I want to thank the School of Art and Design and the printmaking department for inviting me here as well. And I want to welcome everybody from, I hope, four corners of the world who are able to participate in this webinar. Before I start, I just want to give a thank to Charlene for recognizing the original people who inhabited this land. We're all coming, we are all some of our path, and we cannot be here without the contributions of those who came before us. In some ways, my work kind of touches upon this kind of issue in terms of diving into the history and learn about how we became the way we are through the contributions of others. And today I just want to take a quick journey, an abbreviated journey through my work and get to the central theme of this art lecture. And it is about the confluence of events that come together that inspires or created us. But before I start, I just want to give a shout out to Jeff Leake, who is probably participating with his students from Portland State University, and also some of my longtime friends and family member who probably is also logging on here. Just they probably have never heard me talk about my work before. So before I start, I just want to say welcome, and here I go. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everything works. Okay. Let me know if you guys are not seeing what I'm looking at. Okay, so I'm going to start. So my name is Fred Lang, and like Eric said, I teach at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and I've been living in Boston for quite a while. And for most of my life, I lived in predominantly in 3 different countries: China, Canada, and United States. And for some weirdest reason, I don't consider myself Bostonian, and I consider myself anything but, even though I've been here the longest. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work I've done in the past 10 years. I'm going to start with this one slide, which is a piece, it's an installation I did almost exactly 10 years ago. It was an exhibition at the ICA in Boston, and it was part of the Foster Prize exhibition. In this particular exhibition, I kind of researched and mined into a little known history in China. It's based on a lost secret language called Nuisu. And this language is essentially the only known language that was developed in secrecy and used exclusively for a particular gender, and that was unknown to the outside world. And it was passed on from mother to daughter for centuries, and it started around Yuan Dynasty, which is almost 900 years ago. And it literally, the last person was able to speak the language passed away in the early part of the century. So it stretched a long history, and it was accidentally discovered around the time I was born in China in the mid-60s. And I kind of dedicated this whole exhibition on the idea of this kind of notion of information gets passed on from mother to daughter. In this particular piece, the central to this piece is the left sculpture with a paper reaching to the sky. And it was during that period, my daughter was around 6, and she was the height of that table. And within that book, on top of it, I paper cut all the names of the known female ancestors from my family, from my paternal family, into that book, and as it reached into the sky. So this particular exhibition kind of launched a decade-long journey into digging into history and finding hidden truth behind the thing that made us who we are. So I'm going to go back a little bit into my childhood with just this one image, and it kind of sums up in terms of how I began my curiosity about the world beyond my own existence or my own experience. Growing up in China during the Cultural Revolution time, we were very restricted in terms of what we could access in terms of media and knowledge and books. And one time I came up on a photograph of this mountain, which is Huashan, and it had a photograph with my oldest brother on it, and he's looking down at the mountain, and there's clouds underneath of him. And from that point, I always thought, how could a mountain be that high, and then where the heck was he? And it kind of forever piqued my curiosity about places that's far away. Another, I'm going to jump ahead in terms of my creative genesis, which began with kind of looking back at trying to understand some of the complexities in terms of Chinese landscape paintings. And one of the things that I came to be inspired by is this particular painting by Fang Kuan, which it's on the left side of it. It's a painting that was painted in the 9th century during the Song Dynasty. And it's a very classic Song painting, but embedded within that is a painting, if you get a chance to look at it, it's called Traveler in the Stream. And all you see is the mountain and the stream underneath, and the kind of compression of the space and the monumental rocks kind of hovering over the landscape underneath, and then with the stream below. But if you look carefully, there's a tiny little figure walking with an ox, walking past the stream. And in this particular painting, it kind of personified the notion of man's relationship with nature, and also embedded within the idea of Taoism, how we are all part of the stream and we're all part of nature. Everything is interconnected. The second painting is by Wang Meng, which is a painting that was painted during the late Yuan Dynasty and early Ming Dynasty, which is kind of a painting that I guess Yuan Dynasty one can think of Yuan Dynasty as during the Genghis Khan period when the Mongols conquered China. In this particular painting, if you look at it, it's a very classical Chinese painting with this kind of landscape painting as well. And both of these paintings falls within the category of monumental paintings. And what that means is that the paintings give you this kind of monumentality of the landscape and the rocks that hovers over the landscape below. And this particular painting differed from the painting on the left in the way that if you look at the painting itself, it doesn't give you the notion of kind of a political rebelliousness to it. But within the brush marks and within the harshness of the landscape Wang Meng is depicting, it actually, in a very subtle way, he was painting a political painting against the Mongol invasion. So within these two understanding of the work, I kind of trying to think about how in my own work can embed these kind of ideas into my own work. So I'm going to jump ahead and give you an example of a print drawing that I've made during that period of reflecting on those two pieces. And this particular piece is give you a sense of the composition that's derived from Fan Kuan's landscape, this kind of verticality and the compression of the space, and then this kind of monumentality. And this particular piece print was also included in the exhibition that I was in during that period, and you can see it in the background, two pieces. In the foreground, it's another piece that encompasses of ceramic pieces that was created with white porcelain made in Dehua, China, which I will speak about that a little bit later in how that ties to my central theme. This particular exhibition, when I saw the space, there are two things that came to my attention. One is the darkness of the floor, and the other is the window, the vertical window to the right side. Okay, so here you can see the close-up of the ceramic pieces, the porcelain pieces that's kind of cut in half, and the idea of it is it's submerging halfway down into the mud, or in this particular case, I'm thinking of like a river. And it was based on a Buddhist story that was told to me during one of my many travels, that in parts of India, every spring for rite of passage, there's a Buddhist a ritual of cleansing oneself and getting rid of one's worldly material possession. And when I saw the floor, that story immediately came to my mind of having all of these kind of a worldly possession that's floating down, including the notion of Buddhism and the notion of religion. And here you can see on the right, it's one of my paper cut sculptural piece, which I placed it in front of this vertical window, very much like a Chinese scroll. And in this particular sculpture, I kind of utilize the notion of light and an empty space to capture the space surrounding it and stretch what is created in a flat two-dimensional way and stretch it into three-dimensional space. I'm going to show you a few other images of this kind of a paper cut idea. And here's an image from a pitch project from Milwaukee Art in Milwaukee a few years later, which you can see closely that the complexity of intertwining paper cut, which is a very much a Chinese folk art tradition, and introducing that into kind of a three-dimensional sculptural piece. And here's a detail of the construction and the cut. And when I was making these things, I have certain kind of rules that I go by. One is that it has to be held together by its own, and also it's all hand cut. The next thing I'm going to show is a body of work I did, or a big installation I did for Milwaukee Art Museum. And I was very honored to be invited to create an installation piece for their new east wing, which looks eastward into the sunrise, looking at the Lake of Michigan. And here, of course, you can see Santiago Caravera, who's made this beautiful architectural gem on the lake of on the water, or the lakefront of Michigan in Milwaukee. And inside of the museum, there was an oculus circle that goes from the main entrance to the second floor exhibition hall. And when I saw the space, it reminded me of one of the pieces I did in Austria in the late 90s, which I kind of used the idea of the circle, which is very much a Eastern and Buddhist and Taoist metaphor, with a kind of a hierarchy of a Christianity. And then when I saw that, I wanted to recreate that kind of idea again. So what I did is began with this sculptural piece rising up through the oculus, and then what you can say coming down, and then coming down through to the main floor, and then reaching into the foyer, and all the way traverse itself all the way down the hallway to the left, and essentially the shimmery paper welcomes the morning light every morning, and that was the kind of an idea for it. And this particular piece was called Morning Sound. Embedded within it, all the I have kind of a natural metaphors such as plants, birds, and things like that. You can see a nice shot of the piece coming down the hallway and ends at this kind of a lotus symbol at the left. Okay, I'm going to show you a video which kind of give you a sense of how the piece was constructed and how it was installed. And then I'm going to, at the end, and where it ended up ultimately after the exhibition, about a year and a half. The exhibition was, the piece was created in Boston and exhibited in Milwaukee. And then its final resting point was in the Forest in upstate New York. So I'm gonna try to show this video and hope it works. Okay, that's a good sign. Good sign.
Drink up, baby, stay up all night. Things you could do, you won't, but you might. The potential you'll be, you'll never kiss you in dreams. Do what I say, and I'll make you okay. Drink up one more time, and I'll make you mine and keep you apart. Deep in my heart, separate from the rest, where I like you the best. Keep the things you forgot. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. That push, shove, won't bend to your will. I'll keep them still.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back into showing you slides, and next body of work I'm going to show you is it's actually a trilogy I made, and it's a installation piece that it's a trilogy that I made that was shown in 3 different cities, and the first one was it was included as part of this exhibition at the Bachelor Gallery at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and it was curated by Lisa Tang with the support of Pace Art Gallery. And basically, Lisa was able to tap into Pace artists and invite these Chinese artists and to create an exhibition about Chinese dream. And basically, I think she tapped into the slogan that Xi Jinping came up with a few years ago, which was called the China Dream, and she kind of played off that a little bit, and essentially what Xi Jinping did was that Xi Jinping took the American dream and played off that and trying to create a kind of a nationalism into a Chinese dream. So, but what Lisa Tang did here is that she actually invited artists that was deeply affected by the Cultural Revolution, and invited them to participate in this exhibition. And the artists including this exhibition are Song Dong, Ma Qiuxia, and Li Songsong, Hai Bao, and Zhang Xiaogang, and all these like very prominent Chinese artists. And I was very honored to be part of this exhibition. And in this particular piece, I called it Biophony of Spring. I'm sorry, this one's Biophony of Fall. And it was created with essentially paper cut sculpture with a mirror underneath, and then the leftover cut pieces surrounding it. And in the background, you can see the painting by Zhang Xiaogang, I'm sorry, Zhang Huan, which is painted with temple ashes. And then farther in the back, you see one of his earlier pieces where he sits there with the flies on his, sitting in a room with flies covering all over him in sweat. And then on the floor piece, it's a Song Dong's piece of just a natural river and moving part, ephemeral aspect of nature. And in that regard, my work falls within that because there's a kind of a temporariness and there's a kind of a ephemeralness and of the work that you can see in the last video, that I don't see everything as a kind of a permanent state, and we're all in the state of flux and change. And here's an image of a art patron who's trying to look through the mirror, and I view the mirror as a kind of a portal into another time and space. And here's the second piece. This piece actually was created first. This was a Biophony of Spring, and this particular piece was shown at the Korea Museum as part of a larger exhibition. And once again, same idea, same concept, and the idea is that the mirror acts as a kind of conduit to another time and space. And then the last piece of the trilogy is on the right side here, which was installed during the same year, winter of the same year, in a Chao Art Center in Beijing, which was a brand new art center opened up in the heart of Beijing's most fashionable district. And in this particular piece on the right, rather than having one mirror on the bottom, I kind of used this as an opportunity to have two mirrors, one on the bottom, one on top. On the left side, during the same, I included this because it was another exhibition I did during the same time that year at Calhoun Museum of American Art here in Massachusetts. And you can see this, the mirror itself, it creates a kind of engagement people don't normally don't participate in, because very often you just sit back and look at the work, and the mirror creates a different kind of engagement, which I found was kind of interesting. And here's a look at what the viewer would see, in essentially an endless column of infinite image, which I have to say, I kind of have to, I was thinking about, Kusama's, mirrors and the infinite mirrors and all of that. And I thought this was a wonderful way of creating my own version of it. I'm going to move fast because I'm going to move to the central discussion of this talk, and that is we're going to start right here. It's an exhibition I was very honored to be part of, which is called Convergence. It's an exhibition that was put together by the Addison Gallery of American Art at the Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. Phillips Academy is famous for being one of the top private high schools in the nation, but also I think most of you know it as this is where Frank Stella went to school. And here, curator Alison Camara created this exhibition, invited 4 artists to touch upon the notion of connectivity around the world. And since my work was thinking a lot about that, I kind of began to think about how do I, what my contribution is to this dialogue. And I'm going to give you, the following pieces will give you kind of an idea of how I developed the theme. So in the exhibition, the central part of the exhibition is this large mirror with ceramic sculpture, actually white porcelain sculpture on top of it. And then there's this large piece of paper cut in the back. And essentially, the conversation I'm going to have now is try to connect the white porcelain to the paper cut in the back, which actually has an image of a dog in it. And I'm going to connect hopefully I can make a connection directly from the white porcelain through events of history to the dog, which is a Pekingese dog. And also this mirror, is also set on a motor that turns at a rotation of 1 hour per rotation. So essentially, when the viewer comes into the space, they're not going to see the mirrors actually turning. But if they spend enough time in the space, they'll see that the head of the Buddha is pointing in a different direction. And if they spend an hour in the museum, come back, they would think it never moved. So here I am looking at I created this sculpture pieces in Dehua, China, which is a place which most people never heard of, and it's actually near my ancestral home in the same in Fujian province. And in the foreground, you can see the white porcelain, which is known as Dehua white, and in most museums, if you go to museums, it's this kind of in the Chinese section, you see a white sculpture, a ceramic piece. You'll see that it's called Dehua white, which is the epitome of Chinese white porcelain. In the background, there are 2 images of Buddha heads, which I will talk about that a little bit later. I will make connection between that and this as well. And the idea of using the white porcelain for this exhibition was kind of important for me because during the late Ming period and the early Qing dynasty, white porcelain was one of the 3 major exports from China. And the other 2 were silk and tea. And because of this exchange, China became extremely wealthy. And as well as the idea of Chineseness or the Chinese arts and craft began to be visible or through this kind of trade into Europe and then later on into the Americas. And this particular trade of porcelain and silk and tea was eventually somewhat lopsided because China produced these things because they existed from the ground. Chinese only wanted 1 thing or 2 things in return, which is gold and silver. And for the Westerners to get gold and silver, it's much harder. In some ways, they actually have to go create an army, conquer the land, and then pillage the land to get the silver to be traded for tea, ceramic, and silk. There's a book. My entire exhibition for this exhibition was based on a book by Amartya Ghosh, which is an Indian writer, wrote this trilogy of River of Smoke, Flood of Fire, and I think the last one's called Field of Poppies. And the idea how Opium War both enriched the West and shaped the Western economic structure, and as well as shaped Chinese psyche, because the silk essentially the Second Opium War defined China's Chinese history for the next 400 years. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit, and you can see that the porcelain, there are different kinds of Chinese Buddha heads floating on top of this bed of turning table. And also I was very much borrowing from the whole notion of, you know, when you go to Chinese restaurant, everybody knows this thing called Lazy Susie. And, you know, I'm not sure in China they call it that. They just call it a table. So I'm going to give a little bit of history in terms of how did we get from there to here. And I'm going to start with this particular image of a palace in Beijing, which is called Renmingyuan. And it was a palace that was part of the summer palace, which is a summer residency for the emperor during the Qing dynasty. And because of the imbalance of the trade, Britain forced China to sell opium to its people. And when China refused, because they saw what happened to its citizens, under the disguise of free trade, they invaded China because they want to protect trade. So that sounds kind of familiar right now, right? And of course, China at that point has the Qing dynasty has existed for almost 250 years without going to war with anybody. And the Europeans been fighting for the past 300 years since the Renaissance time, first with each other and then with conquering other lands. So they brought in all these like modern weapons, and the Chinese Qing soldiers was no match to them. And of course, they destroyed the Qing army very quickly without much of a rebellion. And it was during their invasion of Beijing, the son of Thomas Bruce, Earl of Elgin, Earl of Elgin, was summoned to China to take out the remnants of this, the Renmingyuan Palace. The reason they sent Earl Elgin VIII there was because he's the son of Earl Elgin VII, who is famously known for taking this particular piece out of Athens, out of Pantheon, and currently it resides in the British Museum. And the British Empire thought it would be a wonderful idea to take the only marble palace existed in China back to London. Unfortunately, as you can see, when Earl VIII, Elgin VIII sent his army over across the bridge, demanded the surrender and handing over of the palace, the last remnant of the Qing army executed their emissaries, and as a result of that, they destroyed the palace, and you can see the palace still stand the way it was destroyed. It was never repaired. So how did we get from that point to the dog in the background? Well, one of the things that the British Empire had know for sure was that they want to punish the empress who refused to surrender, and they knew that to get to the empress was to get to the heart of what she loved, which was these 5 Pekingese dogs. And here you only see 4. Where's the 5th one? Well, the 5th one was, here's you can see the Empress of Dowager, who loved these dogs, and the dogs which was at the time being revered as holy creatures. And anyone that does any harm to the dogs would be executed. So the Britons knew that. So they, as a kind of a punishment, they took one of the dog and gave it to this lovely queen, Queen Victoria, who was regal, beautiful, stylish, and because of this gift to the queen, Pekingese and this type of dog became very fashionable in the West, and they were called the pocket dogs. And essentially, from that point onwards, in streets of London and Paris, society ladies wouldn't be caught without their own Pekingese dog as a pocket dog. Well, unfortunately, reality is a little bit harsher than what artists can depict, and the real image of Queen Victoria and her dog actually looks like this, right? So, and the real image, the only single existing image of that dog, which aptly named Luti, is by a German artist, Friedrich Keil, and this is the only existing painting of the image of the dog while it was alive. There are other images. I just did a quick search to see if there are other images, and if you want to possess one of the images of this Pekingese dog, Empress dog, Queen's dog, you can actually go online and order it right now, and there's this print of the dog, the majestic pet of the dog. Okay, but what I did is I took the same dog, same composition, and created this particular piece, which is a 52 by 68, and using the traditional Chinese paper cut method, and created and embedded within it the images of silkworms, poppy, opium poppies, and other kind of symbols that kind of personifies the Opium War. And in this particular image, I don't know if you guys can see that. You see these two prints to the right. And the print on the left, both prints are essentially prints of Buddha heads, and the print on the left is a print of a Buddha head that existed from 5th century, and the one on the right existed from around 15th century. So these two kind of differed about 1,000 years, but they differ in style dramatically. The one on the left actually has a kind of a side glance view, almost a 3/4 view of the Buddha head. The one on the right is the traditional, what we come to be seen as a traditional Chinese head-on Buddha head. And the reason the one on the left is that way is because if everybody think of trade as a one-way street, but in some ways, everyone knows that Buddhism itself was not originated in China. It actually came from the West. And the original Buddha sculptures were created by artisans that was left over from the Alexander the Great period. So they created these initial Buddha heads, basically following the Hellenistic tradition, and which looked more like themselves. It took a long time before the Buddha head actually became stylized into the Chinese figure. And the earliest example of that kind of thing actually dates back to almost like Tang Dynasty. So that's even earlier than what Ming Dynasty is. So in the way that the trade goes back and forth for centuries, and it kind of shaped both China and the West. In this particular image of the installation, I have images on the right are drawings, and in this particular expression, I wanted to use elements that's very much part of the subject, which is ceramics, paper, and the other thing I can't use opium. What I did was use smoke. So, so the drawings, the 6 drawings on the right was created basically from smoke, and the images are of poppy seeds. The one on the sculpture on the left is essentially a ceramic porcelain cast of a cast. So essentially, it's a cast of a cast. It's a negative of a negative, and let's see. And here you can see a closer up of both the Dehua white porcelain sculpture and the smoke drawings. And the thing about the Dehua white is also known in French called Chenin Blanc, or Chinese white. And I just recently did a English version of that search. Ironically, there is a kind of called China white, and it happened to be a character in a comic strip that sells opium. How ironic that all these years it kind of circled its way back into the popular culture. I'm going to end the discussion with a couple recent work that I did after the exhibition, and this is just going to give you a sense of what I've done since then. And these are the works I did during my residency in Shanghai, China, before the pandemic. Because of the, actually we have 10 more minutes. I'm going to show you a quick video of a collaboration I did with a vocal artist that was as part of the residence. And she's actually a German artist who is currently living in Berlin. Her name is Michaela Steinhaus. And she did the vocal, I did the installation, and it's a very short 1.5 minute video. Okay, so I just have a few more slides to show, and essentially just kind of give you an idea of what I did just prior to the pandemic outbreak and before everybody went into hiatus. So I'm going to very quickly show you a few images, and we can open up for questions. These are this is an installation I did at the Groton School, which is a school where FDR went for high school here in Massachusetts. And then I'm going to end with this kind of this particular image, which is unknown disclosure, unknown location in Boston here, which it's an installation that I'm very much would like to continue with in terms of doing work that's outside of the traditional spaces and traditional gallery spaces, and try to work in spaces that's more in public. So I'm gonna that's all for my talk, and I'm gonna open up for conversation or questions if anybody has any. Should I stop sharing?
Yes. Thanks, Fred. I'm going to moderate the talk. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and I'll be reading them, and Fred hopefully will be answering them. That's how it works, right? So I'm just gonna go back. So earlier in the talk, I think when your piece in Milwaukee was, you were showing that piece, the question was, how long does one of those things, does it take to make one of these?
Well, that particular one was, it took quite a while because it was 140 feet long, 60 feet high from bottom to top. And I had 3 assistants helping me, and I would say 90% of the pieces were hand cut. Only the repetitive images were machine cut because it would be too tedious to repeat same image, same patterns over and over. But essentially, it took about 1.5 years to cut. Took about 1.5 minutes, less than a minute to burn.
Easy come, easy go.
That's right. Well, not
Hard
easy.
Hard to get there and easy to go. Okay, can you speak to the relationship between your studio and the exhibition space? How much of your sculptures are formed in the moment in the exhibition space, and how much beforehand in your studio?
Okay, so very often when, every time I exhibit somewhere, I kind of take photos of it, and then I do schematics of what I want to do with it. And then because there's no rehearsal in this, and every piece, once it's cut, it only goes up once and that's it. I can't reuse it. So in the sense that every time I make something, I do like a mental 3D drawing in my head. And I do try to do digital mock-ups with it. And essentially, it's kind of a cross your finger and hope it works kind of thing every time I make it. And the thing about that is that in my studio, I try to use it less as a production place, but as a place where I test a lot of things out. And it's essentially a place where I, allow failure to exist. And then when I do go on stage, everything all the mistakes have been ironed out. So that's kind of a relationship.
Cool, thank you. And Fred, what a treat getting to hear you speak on your work. I was wondering about the unfurling, unraveling, and folding back on itself aspect to many of your cut paper pieces, and how that might or might not relate to ideas of the Mobius strip and/or Buddhism. Is there a connection there for you?
Oh, that's an amazing in-depth question. I think I do know where that came from. It's such a wonderful question, and I think it actually gets to the heart of like my work. Is that in Buddhism and Taoism, everything's connected. There's a circular effect into each other, and like I said before this, we can't be here without acknowledging the people that came before us. We're all part of the same stream, right? And to ignore any of that, essentially saying that we're kind of a blank slate, and none of us are blank slates, and we all kind of carry our own ancestors, our own history, and our collective history with us. And what the folding and unfolding of that reflects the complexity of this kind of relationship between us. And it's kind of like a metaphor for how we kind of like using these things to kind of pull it apart and put it together in a way that we don't normally see in life. We just see the now. We don't see the complexity and the hidden structure or the hidden system that that actually holds us together. And for me, that's kind of important because most of my installation pieces, it all has to function in a way that it just accidentally comes together. It can't be a kind of a forced or awkwardly moment, right? I think in some ways, the rehearsal I do, it's a way so that when I do create it, it's a moment that I can indulge in creating by itself, not to think about what I did before. So it's like a dancer that's in the moment, or athlete in the moment of doing without thinking about how did I do that, right? So in all of that gets wrapped into this kind of a, like you said, a Mobius strip, or kind of a loop that we constantly circle back. The further I go, the older I became, the further I go back to my childhood. So that's the circle of life that we become. We kind of journey into, right?
Interesting. Thanks. Could you please tell us what kind of paper you use for your paper cut pieces? How much do you plan your large scale paper installations, which I think you've talked about already? Do you have a concrete plan, or do you work intuitively in the space, which you've also answered? Thank you very much for sharing your work today.
I ironically, interesting enough, I was looking at my notes. So one of the things that I was talking about, I forgot to talk about earlier, is that in my exhibition at the North Dakota Museum of Art, in that particular shot, all the work, there were 4 different locations where I created work. So the ceramic was created in Dehua, China. The 2 large pieces were created in my studio, but there were 12 large prints that was created at the Provincetown, Massachusetts. But the central piece, which is the paper, which is this gold paper, was I first discovered it in Oaxaca, Mexico. So it was a paper that I accidentally came across when I was doing a residency in Oaxaca. And it was also the first time I created a sculptural piece out of that type of paper. And at the end of the exhibition, I burned it. Forevermore, I wanted to recreate that installation, but no museum allowed me to burn the piece inside of the museum. Therefore, I had to take it all the way to upstate New York to find a place to burn it.
Cool.
Oh, in terms of, no, I don't quite do intuitively, because each installation takes about 100 sheets. If I intuitively do every sheet, it would be impossible. It would take impossible amount of time for me to do it. I can't work that fast. So what I do is I utilize my printmaking skill. It's like multiples, how to create multiples. And this is where you never expect how the knowledge of printmaking expand into even this type of paper cut. So printmaking has a huge part, or the reproduction of printmaking has a huge part of, in terms of the reproduction of the images I make. But the original maquette or original design, it's very much intuitively designed. And that usually takes weeks to create one of those designs.
I was wondering what are Mr. Liang's thoughts regarding the difference between subtractive process of Chinese paper cut method and the additive process of drawing on paper, especially in a labor-intensive work like the stream installation?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question, because essentially, when I do paper cut, I'm essentially making a drawing on a flat 2-dimensional surface. So if you use a pen to draw, or pencil to draw a line on a piece of paper, you're creating a positive form in space, right? But what I'm doing is that I'm exactly what the questionnaire allude to. I'm actually cutting out a negative space, which exists both as positive space and a negative space in a physical sense. But after I finish cutting it, it still exists in the two-dimensional form. But it's only when I pull it apart into a three-dimensional space, I begin to occupy another type of space. The space surrounding the object and the space the object existing. And also, I also kind of capture another aspect of space, which is the physical light that bounces onto and emits from the actual piece, and the light that travels through. So the positive and the negative space actually plays a huge part in terms of how I create these things. And matter of fact, it actually creates a big problem for me because paper has weight to it, but it doesn't have strength to it. So I can't create volumetric pieces that has a lot of air in it without collapsing. So in a way that I'm always cognizant of how to create a kind of light floating object that it envelops air between and space in between. So that's a huge kind of a technical difficulty that I have to confront each time I make these pieces.
Can you tell us more about the forms cut into the paper?
The which?
The forms, the specific forms, I think.
So originally, when I first started cutting these forms, they were very much, based on Chinese landscapes, the kind of imagery and metaphors in it. But when I was in Oaxaca, I don't know if any of you ever been there. If you ever get a chance, go. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It has so many different plants. You can just walk out and you get inspired by different shapes and forms, by the plants and the things that grows around there. And from that point onwards, I started to collect images of botany images and images of natural nature as a way for me to, kind of create forms. But you won't recognize it because I'm not a realist. I don't copy the image verbatim. I kind of copy the form in a way that how, say, if two leaves come together, how the leaves would cast a shadow that doesn't even look like the leaves. That's more interesting to me than the leaves themselves. So.
Can you talk more about your decision to burn your work, to rest it? Did the ashes become important or not? Also, what shape was the projected video onto the work from your recent residency?
So one of the thing one of the reasons I started using paper is because I'm a printmaker and printmakers love paper. The second reason is the notion of impermanence. Painting just seems so heavy and serious and formal, and paper seems a little bit more, malleable and also impermanent. It's a plus and a minus because no museum want to collect my installation because they don't think it's permanent. So, try to say that to Jackson Pollock's paintings, right? So the thing that's kind of important to me is that paper, it's malleable and it's impermanent. And the idea of burning it kind of return to the ritual, of I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chinese funerary ritual of burning money, right? And in some ways that's kind of following that kind of idea, that kind of tradition. And what is ashes important to me? I was thinking about collect the ashes and do something else with it, but it was so cold and everything melted into the snow. I wasn't able to. I think I need to do another piece.
Do it in the drier weather.
Yeah. Actually, interesting enough was that I actually was intentionally looking for snow on the ground because when it snowed, I literally called out my friend. I said, I need to come to your space and put this thing up while there's still snow on the ground So I wanted to juxtapose the kind of different seasons and the season of the kind of pristineness of the snow on the ground versus the shimmering paper piece on top of it.
Is that going to be a series of like burning it in different seasons, or?
Yeah, I think if you're given the opportunity, right? That's
Okay. One of our professors, Amanda Wojcik, just asked, thank you for your lecture. You mentioned that you have rules when you work. For example, all paper is usually hand cut. Can you talk about how you make rules for yourself and why rules are useful to you as an artist?
Well, that's actually kind of interesting. I don't think I'm alone in having rules for myself. Actually, I was talking to a friend, Sarah Z, one time. This is like years ago, and we were, talking about art and stuff like that. And she actually mentioned this first, and I kind of realized, you know what, that's what I do as well. And she said, like she works within confine of certain rules that she sets up. Because like it or not, we all have these kind of rules, and some of them practical. Like how big is it? How much is it going to cost? How how long does it take? But some of it kind of conceptual and aesthetic. So one of the earlier pieces for these paper pieces, the earlier pieces, the rules that I have was that it has to hold itself. It cannot have other elements to hold it together, and it only has one central axis. So in other words, that single string holds the entire thing together. The difficulty of that is that the difficulty with that rule is that the rule of nature is much greater than what the possibilities are. And essentially, the paper itself can only hold so much, and I can only make it so big, and without having it look too heavy. I can make it look really heavy and make it big because it'll hold up. If I want all those air and negative space in it, it has to have other kind of armature to hold it up. So that's some of the rules like that. And also another rule is that I have to intuitively make these things myself. Nobody else can do it. So which is good and bad, because every time I make one of these things, it comes with an invitation to the museum, but also come with a hotel and a plane ticket as well, which is kind of nice.
Okay. What do you think the relationship between traditional Chinese art skills and modern art?
I think in some ways, if you look at history of Chinese art, it's actually more conducive to, more akin to modernism than the later Chinese art. So for example, anything before Qing Dynasty, which has a lot of European influence because of the trade, Chinese art was predominantly focused on the abstract quality of art. Wasn't focusing on representation at all. It's predominantly focused on the quality of the mark, the gesture of the mark, the dryness of the brush, the crustness of the rock, and all these things. They don't even care if it looks like a bird or a rock. They just want to know that if it feels like one. And in that regard, I think Chinese art is actually much more modern than European art at the time. So at the time, Ming Dynasty, European were reaching its height of its art form, which is Renaissance time, right? So Ming Dynasty was still concerning itself with like scholar rocks, which is basically an abstract piece of rock sits on top, and they want to see how beautiful and aesthetically pleasing that piece of rock is. has no meaning and has no reference. So in that way, I think it's pretty modern.
As part of that question, that first question, there's another question that I think connects to it. And how does your work, or does your work, address or think about 20th century Chinese political history?
Well, my life in China spans the entire period of the Cultural Revolution. So I think I understand the Cultural Revolution from a first-hand experience, and that encompasses a large part of, or important part of 20th century, right? And also the thing that I learned about Chinese history actually came after I graduated from graduate school. So in a way that there are two aspects of my knowledge of China. One is this very confined period of 8 years. Well, I'm sorry, 12 years, but 8 years of Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 68 to 76. So I have that kind of an internal understanding experience of it. But my knowledge of Chinese history is all through the books I read since I graduated from school. And that actually is through much broader understanding of Chinese history. And it's a very different kind of understanding from people who grew up in China who study the same history. So in the way that many of my Chinese friends always say, my Chinese history is tainted by the yellow, by the white people, Europeans, right? But at the same time, I think my understanding of Chinese history, it's a little bit broader because you can see things much clearer when you're farther away than you're inside of it. So people experience, like my experience of Cultural Revolution is a very emotional one. So I don't, for that particular reason, I don't touch it. Right? So I kind of talk about the connection between the East and West, who I am, and through a longer history of Chinese history, and how those, and kind of paraphrasing what Dalai Lama said, is that we're all connected one way or the other. So in some ways, in my work, everywhere I go, I try to make these connections. And if given longer time, I can connect my initial reason for you selecting this paper with historic connection to Central America and Oaxaca from that region. But that's another discussion.
There's a question about the lights that were used in your installations. I think the lights that were coursing through some of the areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right there.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like the implementation of it, or?
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of weird because my son, I just put one of these sculptural pieces in his room, and he's like, "Oh, it's just LED light." I'm like, "No, it's not. Hold on a sec." So it's just a LED light, but ironically, as far as I know, you cannot buy them in the United States. I literally had to buy specially made ones that's 120 volt. So what's interesting about these lights is that it's the only LED light that's emits 360-degree light. So most of this type of LED light you buy here is for countertops and bars. So it only faces out one direction. So this is like a tube. So essentially, what I did is that when I was at the residency, I wanted to use this light as kind of incorporate.
Uh-oh, you may have lost Fred. Oops. Okay, guys. may have lost our panelists. Sorry, Fred. There's still some more questions, but that will remain unanswered. On behalf of our frozen guest, I'd like to say thank you for coming to our talk, and please review the website for our future talks, and please come to those as well. Thank you.